Hi, this is Brian Green. Welcome to our episode of Healthcare IT Tech Talks for GE Healthcare. I have with me today Michael and Ryan from Dell, and we're going to talk about some enterprise imaging topics today. This is the first time we've done a podcast with three of us on the screen, so hopefully this works out, and hopefully we can continue doing this style. So the first topic that I wanted to bring up for you guys at Dell is obviously this is we try to talk mostly about enterprise imaging in this podcast. So you have this concept of PACS and VNA, and I'm trying to see if I can get your perspective here. One of the things, and especially since I think you guys both went to HIMSS, so maybe you could talk a little bit about maybe what you saw at HIMSS in relation to this topic, or if anything at all. I think what I have in my notes is I say, look up in the sky, it's a PACS, it's a VNA. No, it's a MIMPS, right? We keep going through these different vernacular. So about the topic of VNA versus PACS, when VNA, the concept of VNA first came out, the idea was that you would have this kind of overlay for all these different PACS, or you would have this vendor neutral platform. So you would make it easier to migrate to different platforms over time, which plays well with what you guys do at Dell, because you provide this neutral storage platform. You don't care who the PACS is on the front of it, right? Of course, I'm sure you prefer GE PACS, right? but it doesn't matter what the PACS is. And VNA was kind of trying to do the same thing with at the application level. So I'll kind of let you guys chew on that for a second, and we can discuss that first.
Well, first of all, Brian, thanks for having us. We certainly appreciate the time and the opportunity to kind of exchange ideas with you, because you as well are pretty experienced in this space, and so it's fun to chat with you and kind of compare ideas. I would say I don't think you can tell the difference between VNA and a PACS at HIMSS.
Yeah,
those worlds have started to merge now, and I think that's a good thing.
So
I think the idea that people were putting in VNAs as a way to be able to separate themselves from their PACS.
Yeah.
In the end, I don't know that they were really used from an enterprise imaging perspective, because that really wasn't the initial goal. And I think what we're seeing, and I'm going to let Ryan add to this, is that this idea now of really revisiting this idea of an enterprise archive, and it does please Dell, because we certainly have a pretty long-standing relationship in medical imaging, and I think we sit pretty high on the technology hill, have a pretty good view of the horizon, and certainly there's so much value that can be derived when you think about images as an asset of the enterprise, and then therefore manage them, share them, and make them available as an enterprise asset as opposed to a departmental asset. So we're pretty encouraged about this evolution. But Ryan,
sure. Thanks, Mike. So, you hit a real good point there, Brian, when you talked about the convergency, right, and what's going on with VNA and PACS. When you look at the legacy VNA, right, and where VNA started, it really was just a DICOM archive, right? That was the intention. Yeah. It's going to be an archive that would sit there, set DICOM to it, and everything would be great. The reality is that with the convergence and enterprise imaging strategies that have come into play by all of the different vendors, we now see a much more intelligent type of atmosphere, right? Where the data can be sent there. It can be radiology, cardiology, digital pathology, dermatology, et cetera. And having all of that sent there, and then having intelligence actually built into these VNAs, whether it be ILM policies, whether it be DICOM routing, et cetera, that really is the key, right? And that's what's making, I think, this resurgence of VNA become far more, I think, perspective to people what's going, okay, it's not just a DICOM archive anymore. We can actually really do intelligent things with it that we couldn't do with our PACS, or that we couldn't do with whether it be siloed PACS or whatever. We just couldn't do it. So I think that's the key. And as Mike said, at HIMSS, you couldn't tell the difference, right? Because every PACS vendor has a VNA now. And it's all just
even if it's not a VNA, right?
Yeah, it's part of the ecosystem, right?
Right.
And as Mike referenced, Dell, we love it, right? So we definitely are, we are a market leader in this space when it comes to storing and understanding and housing the data, right? And computing the data. So ultimately, we have a great responsibility for it. And I think that's really where VNA is right now, is that it's become synonymous with imaging, right? If you say imaging, there's got to be a VNA in there.
Yeah, and it's almost like what I'm hearing you guys say is at HIMSS, it was hard to make the distinction because every vendor is kind of saying, well, this is my ecosystem. And for the front end packs, I have this. And then for the archive piece, I have this. And to manage your data, I have this VNA, right? Yeah,
and then I have this software on top of the VNA, right? So we have this software and this AI and this, that, and it's all become part of the ecosystem. Yeah.
And you know, it's somewhat natural to see this happen, right? Because you know, in addition to the fact that there are image objects being generated in lots of different departments now. It's not, you know, it's not the ownership just of the imaging department, right? And you work in point of care ultrasound and look at the explosive growth we've been seeing in point of care ultrasound.
Yeah.
So that data needs to be managed. But the other thing that we've seen happen is healthcare organizations have been consolidating.
Mm-hmm.
And as they consolidate, they start coming together in multiple systems, which now all of a sudden, it wasn't, well, I want to bring radiology and cardiology together. Now it's, hey, I've got 3 or 4 different radiology image management systems. It makes no sense to manage those as individual systems. So, you know, the convergence happened not only across ologies, but it also happened just across facilities within the same clinical service line.
Yeah.
So I think it's somewhat natural, and I think it's honestly only provides improvement in overall workflow and more efficiency for healthcare organizations to manage their data.
Yeah, I'm gonna use your quote here, Mike. You said to me previously, the virtue of image management should extend beyond the radiology department. So, yeah, right. That's where enterprise imaging comes in. I wanted to ask you guys from a Dell perspective. You know, I think we all know how radiology images and cardiology images are managed. How are you seeing customers, Dell customers that are using these large storage platforms, how are you seeing them manage other imaging data or even unstructured medical data that's not imaging? Even things like endoscopy and pathology and so forth. You know, what are you guys seeing out there?
Yeah, so that category of images, you know, we refer to as encounter-based imaging. So encounter-based imaging are these image objects. They could be videos, they could be still images that are being generated outside the traditional imaging departments.
Yeah.
But they're nonetheless images. And what's important to note about those are a couple things. One, many of them aren't scheduled exams. And because they're not scheduled, there may not be a session number. So the question is, how do you then, if you capture them and if you store them, which you should because they're valuable pieces of clinical information, how do you associate them not with a particular archive system, but how do you associate them with a particular encounter or patient visit? Because often the clinician that wants access to those, they're not radiologists or cardiologists. They may be physicians or nursing staff on a med-surg floor.
This old world of having lots of different software. You had the one storage platform from Dell, but many different software systems managing different things like pathology versus endoscopy versus radiology and cardiology. Are you seeing more people kind of consolidating that under one management platform, or are we still seeing this sort of disparate software environment?
Well, I mean, we are, but people like choice. So, you know, I think
the breed, right?
A consolidated vendor strategy is really effective from a management perspective, maybe even a licensing or cost perspective. But, you know, from a personal preference perspective, the challenge, and it's going to get bigger with analytics and AI.
Which is a topic I was going to bring up too. You know, before we get into analytics and AI, one of the things I wanted to ask you guys about is the storage of data. You know, DICOM is easy, right? The metadata is in there. Everybody's very familiar with DICOM. Some other standards have, you know, come up like XDS. Have you guys seen anyone using other standards or storing the data in different ways, right? Because I think, you know, you guys are storing this raw data with Dell. You know, what are you seeing on your perspective as far as
we do. Yeah, no, it's a great question. We do, right? I mean, so obviously XDS is much more popular in Europe, right, than it really is here in the United States. But we are seeing folks, you know, leverage XDS technologies to store things. We are seeing folks that want to, you know, again, if you look at digital pathology, and Mike can speak to that, it's not, right, there isn't really a DICOM piece of it yet, right? I mean, there's DICOM standards that are built into it, but not everybody's using that. So, so we're storing that data in a different way. I think the key, right, is that when you store all this data and you bring all this data together, whether it be PDFs or JPEGs or TIFFs or DICOM or et cetera, it's all about the metadata modeling, right? How can you bring that data together and then try to gain some insights from modeling the metadata, right? And that's really the unique factor. Because, as you said, DICOM's easy, right? You look at the header, it's easy to do.
Right.
But try doing that with a JPEG, right? Or a PDF or some other thing. It's very hard.
And that begs an interesting question, right, Ryan? You just said DICOM is easy. Should everything be DICOM? Right?
So
everything should be standards based. Right?
Yeah.
It does seem like DICOM's got a pretty good head start.
Yeah.
There's probably, some good arguments to be made that continuing to leverage a mature standard, which I guess we've all been around long enough to call DICOM a mature standard.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Is, versus trying to reinvent it. And I kind of agree with Ryan. I mean, I just don't know with XDS. I don't know that XDS and DICOM were in contention with each other. No. I think they kind of had a little different. I think there was a different focus being put on cross-enterprise document exchange versus DICOM. So it was less of the image format and more how are we going to share this information? Does XCS afford the community this idea to build a repository, but then also the registry associated with the repository, which might make sharing better. Where DICOM, I think's focus has been, hey, not only can you come up with a standard way to store data, but now as you want to build out some intelligence from that data, mine that data, you now have lots of different metadata elements which to use, which I think for the purposes of what we've been seeing in enterprise imaging is pretty valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mike, you bring up a really valid point, right? Is that how do you had XDSI, right, which was an imaging format for XDS, et cetera. But there's never really been a competitor with DICOM. We've come up with lots of DICOM Web, and there's other aspects to make it faster because every DICOM junkie knows, right? It's a chatty communication protocol. It's difficult. It takes a lot of time. But overall, I think DICOM, to answer your question, really, Brian, DICOM to me, as Mike said, we should have a standard. We should have things that are in play there, and I do believe they're all going to get there, right? I mean, when you think there's even DICOM standards for PDFs and secondary captures and all that thing. It's all there.
Yeah.
Same thing with digital pathology. It's there too, right? It's just whether you choose to use it or not.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? Is that my opinion always has been if DICOM defines a way to store a data set, we might as well use it, right?
Couldn't agree more.
Right?